Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hobby Collab. Today I'm going to show you how I go about painting up some Nurgle marked Chaos. This is a kit bashed model using parts from the Putrid Blightkings, and the weapon is from the Prosecutors from the Stormcast Eternals. But no matter what the model is, I think it fits pretty well for any Nurgle-y models you want to paint up. I start with a base coat of Whole Red by Vallejo, and then I'm going to start pre-shading with a white ink. Any dark brownish red will do if you don't have whole red, like a brick red would do as well, or any reddish browns you have. The reason we're using a white ink is because we're going to be pre-shading, kind of defining the volumes on the model here. We're going to be jumping to an ink next, or actually it's a contrast paint we're going to use in the same style as an ink. So you want to make sure that in the areas that you want to be nice and bright, you want to make sure that white is nice and opaque, but you want to make sure you leave some of that whole red in the shadows. That should leave you with something like this. I'm mostly focusing on the armor for this section, so I skip the weapons and shield. Now, if you're not super happy with how dramatic the shadows are, don't worry, we are going to come back and reinforce those later on. And now that we have that pre-shade down, we're going to move on to our first color. This is Plaguebear Flesh by Citadel. Spray this through the airbrush and take advantage of that pre-shade we did. Because this contrast paint is transparent, we're going to be able to work with those highlights and shadows we did previously. And while we're working on this Nurgle-y, yellowy, gross green color, this will work with pretty much any contrast paint. There are very few that aren't transparent, so this technique is applicable to many other schemes. And while I think this looks good, we want to enhance the colors we have, so we're going to move on to Mantis Warrior's green. And as for where you're going to apply this, you want to smooth out those transitions between where that whole red and Plaguebear Flesh is. You can also use this to enhance shadows. That's basically what we're doing in the areas with the whole red still showing through. This adds a little bit more of that green color, but it's not too like unnatural. This Mantis Warrior's green is still a very natural, earthy looking green, but while still being bright and cohesive with the Plaguebear Flesh. And while we're smoothing out those transitions, we're not fully done. I really wanted to push the shadows and increase that contrast, so then we're going to move on to Snakebite Leather. This is a dark, greenish, gross brown color. And we're going to shoot this into the darkest areas, the most shadowed areas. So this is going to be right under his ribs there, the underside of his forearm there, the inside of his legs, just to really enhance that shadow. And the reason we're using a brown color is because we want to keep it in the same, like, well, gross, dirty, Nurgle color. If you have a dark green like Creed Camo is a good example, that would also work, though it would change it from less of a dirty model and more of more like a foresty green color. So that's why I went with, and that should leave us just about right here. This is where you want to be before we move on to the next step. Lots of deep shadows, nice gradients. Not exactly realistic, but it looks good, at least in my opinion. Now we're going to start working on some of those weapons, specifically the shield. We grab Vallejo Dead Flesh, and we're going to go ahead and dry brush that shield. You'll notice there's a little bit of overspray from the Plaguebear Flesh. That's fine, it'll all get worked out after we apply some washes and stuff like that. You want to do a pretty heavy dry brush, making sure you get all of that wood paneling nice and defined. The reason we're using Dead Flesh is because it's still somewhat cohesive with the rest of the scheme. I didn't want to do something like white, because then it would be maybe a little jarring, a little bright. We are going to cover this with a wash anyway, so if you don't have access to this, an ice yellow or something mild like that would do. A medium to light gray would also work. And speaking of ice yellow, we're actually going to use ice yellow to create a bit of a gradient on the shield. Now, that area that had a little bit of overspray at the top left of the shield, I'm going to use this ice yellow to create a little bit of a dry brushed gradient, just to draw a little bit more attention to that side of the shield. It's nice to have a little bit of an asymmetrical shadowing going on. Now, if you didn't have a Dead Flesh or ice yellow, again, just try and move up a shade from the previous layer. You want to be able to create this, like I said, gradient going up to an area to draw attention to it. Now, I had mentioned that we were going to wash the shield, and this is what we're going to wash it with. This is Wildwood. Now, I've heavily thinned mine down with Lamy medium. Any thinner will do. You could also probably use Agrax Earthshade if you want. I just prefer the strength of Wildwood or contrast paints in general. I feel like they add a little bit more color than the washes from GW. Now, as for ratios, this is probably 5 parts medium to Wildwood contrast. If you don't want to bother with that, Agrax or the Shade will do fine. It's not exactly the same, but it's probably close enough if you don't want to go out and buy stuff. Then we're going to move on to washing the actual model itself. I know we did an airbrush, but I actually find that some of the creases were not defined in a way that I liked. So I get Cire brown. This is a little bit more of a walnutty brown, a little lighter. And we're going to thin this down also quite heavily, 6 parts to 8 parts thinner to wash. And we're going to apply this over the entirety of the model. We want to make sure that we don't let this pool on any flat surfaces. We want to make sure we're drawing this paint into the crevices, specifically on this model, the trim. It's a little bit harder on models that don't have trim, and my suggestion for that is just try to end your brush stroke off of the model if you don't have a crevice to push the paint into. And while, I feel like with the Nurgle models, you can get away with a little bit of messiness, I try not to let my models be messy. I want it to be a controlled messiness. I don't want it to be an accidental messiness. But listen, if you're just trying to paint up an army, be as sloppy as you want, right? It's Nurgle. It's not you're not painting for competition here. This is just a quick way to get these models looking nice and painted up quickly. And then comes the painful part of any Chaos model, that is painting the trim. Now, I wanted the emphasis on the model to be on this greenish, brownish tones here, so I'm just going to black out everything, all the trim, and then we're going to add some rust to it later. But if you want to use a brass color or whatever metal you want, go for it, but I wanted to use black because I think it works as a nice frame for the colors we've already painted. I then give all these black areas a quick dry brush with Vallejo Orange Brown. Now, some of these areas are a little tricky to get to, but it's fine if you have a little bit of overbrush here. I know I talked about wanting to be able to control it, but this orange brown, if it touches some of the green areas, it's not too bad. It won't show up too, it won't be so in your face because the colors are relatively close to what we've already got on the model. Or I guess I should say it won't look out of place. Now, if you're using a bright orange, you might have a problem, but if you only have bright orange, try to add a little bit of brown to it to dull it down just a bit. And then we're going to use the cheat button for Nurgle models. We're going to use Dirty Down Rust. Now, you want to apply this to all those areas that we painted black, like the trim. I like to apply this in several layers. I like to start with a neat, that is undiluted with water, layer first. I don't put this over the entirety of the areas I want to cover with rust. I do a quick first layer like this, and then I return later with a slightly thinned down version with water, and then a very thinned down version in small proportions, maybe 50% water to dirty down rust. And the reason you do that is just because you want to have this like layers of rust that's built up over time. If you just slap one layer on there, it looks fine, but maybe a little less natural. So I'd put in the extra 2 or 3 minutes of time to get that enhanced effect. And once you're done, you're going to finish basing up the model in your preferred scheme. I like a snow scheme for mine, so that should leave you with this. Now, for the sake of this model, I threw a quick matte varnish on it because that's how the rest of my army looks. That's completely optional. You don't have to do that. But that is what I did for this model. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this relatively quick Nurgle tutorial. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, all that stuff. And make sure you turn into our battle reports. You can see this guy on the table soon. And if you have any models you want to show off, make sure you join our Discord, which I'll link down below. We have an awesome community with all sorts of painters showing off their awesome, cool projects. So we'd love to have you. Anyway, with that, I'll say goodbye and see you next time.